In this episode of the season, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People for Mentoring Moments, I'm going to pick up where I left off just by saying that we all have bad days. Sometimes we say it's bad luck or it's bad karma. You hear that word sometimes. Like, what's behind the fact that we have difficult days? I remember reading a book to my children, and it was called Alexander's Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. Perhaps you've read that book to your children, and you remember the story of how Alexander wakes up with gum in his hair, and when he gets the cereal box, his brother gets the really cool prize and he gets the nothing prize, and he goes to school and he breaks his glasses, and it's a no good, horrible, very bad day. And the whole thing kind of builds along with that. At some point he says, I think I'll just move to Australia. And then as it gets down to the end of the book, the whole day's gone that way. His mom tucks him in bed, and he just sighs and goes, well, some days are just like that, even in Australia. And some days are like that. I don't really have a good explanation for it, but I do want to give a framework for it if I could. And I'm going to start at a simple level. We're going to go to a little deeper level, and then we're going to go to a little bit deeper level. So this is episode number 2 of this season, and then there'll be a 3 and a 4. Episode number 2, I just want to start by acknowledging that God gave us choice. That God in His wisdom knew that mankind had to choose Him by our own volition. That it was important to God that we would love Him, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. And so God gave mankind the freedom of choice. We know the rest of the story, that Adam and Eve chose against God and chose their own way, and that there were curses or like a stain of sin that came from that. In fact, the Bible says that from generation to generation, this virus of sin has afflicted every generation, even until now. So there were some bad things that came from that may not have been there before. My wife says maybe mosquitoes came because of the fall. I'm not sure if there were mosquitoes before the fall. But I do know this: our world is a sin-stained world, and some of the things that happen to us are not by God's choosing, but they're because man chose like he did. We all hear stories like the homecoming queen being killed by a drunk driver on the same night that she was crowned queen. And we think, how cruel was that? How could a good God allow something like that to happen? And in fact, you might have a person even say that to you from your circle of friends. You might think it yourself. But the point in me bringing that up is to say that God knows it's important for us to make our choices in life. He gave us the right to choose. He gave that to Adam and Eve, and then we experience that too. So a drunk driver can choose to drink and then can choose to drive, and if they do, it could be disastrous. Now, did God want that to happen? No. Did God cause that to happen? No. Is God responsible for that? No. God gave us life, and then man makes choices. This life is imperfect. This life is incomplete. Now, there is a perfection coming. We know that from the end of the story. There is a completion coming. There is a redemption coming, but it's not here yet. So we live in the middle of some very tough times. When you're talking to people, you may find it's helpful to be able to talk to people about the fact that God didn't plan for the world to be this way. That God, in fact, created a world that was good. But He loved us enough that He gave us choice. And that in that choice, people make some choices that are painful. That doesn't solve every problem, but it again gives us a framework. Next, we're going to talk about the fact that sometimes God allows natural disasters or some acts that are even random. Those are hard to understand too, but I want to leave you with this thought, that Jesus did say, in this world you'll have trouble, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. I find some peace and hope in the fact that even if I go through different and hard things, that Jesus understands because He went through hard things too. That He was unjustly judged, treated horribly, died on a cross. And the Bible says that now that He's raised from the dead in heaven as the high priest, we can go to Him and bring Him anything, and He understands because He's been there too. So even if he doesn't take away the pain, he can be with us in the pain. So next we're going to talk about random acts and things that are like hurricanes, earthquakes, and violent acts, and talk about if we can understand where those things might fit in the story of God.